Welcome, welcome. Thanks for those who are just joining. If you're joining us online, we're just settling the room. Have a few people coming in from our little coffee break outside. All right. Great. Well, if you're still with us, congratulations. We had a wonderful launch of a book by our senior fellow, curated by our senior fellow, by many amazing authors, Globalizing Equality, which was a real tour de force of the amazing leadership on feminist foreign policy and multilateralism being led by women in Latin America and the Caribbean for the last couple of hours. And now, if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. I'm Lyric Thompson. It's my pleasure to lead the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative and to have been a co-author on the report that we're launching in this session, which is the 2025 edition, our fourth edition of a paper we write every 2 years looking at the state of feminist foreign policy around the world. And it's been quite the ride. I'll tell you a bit about our context and my co-authors and the work in just a moment. But first, just to say that when we started this organization 3 years ago, building on work that we have incubated with many of you over a number of years, we wanted to have space for feminists inside and outside of government to come together and share best practices, lesson learned, where they're struggling, where they're succeeding. And our sense was that in most of the global fora, particularly if you're representing a government, you have to come talk about the good news and, pretend that it's all going really well. And I think we know instinctually that this work is really hard. It's hard to do well. It's lonely work. We're observing both organized backlash as well as just the kind of quiet, everyday resistance internal to our institutions and indeed to our very selves. So the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative was really born to be a space to come together and speak honestly about how to be able to dream big, to ensure these policies are ambitious, but also to give some concrete guidance on how to implement. And in the last couple of years, as we've seen some of the renouncements and stepping away, how to exit gracefully, how to build that work sustainably for the future, how to anticipate that opposition and prepare. So it's an active learning process and a global community. And this report, which is an extraordinarily heavy lift, that's why we only do it every 2 years. We're a team of 4. And so it entails a huge amount of desk research, interviews, conversations, requesting official documents, being in touch with both the governments who are announcing and implementing these policies, as well as the activists and academics who are crafting them and influencing them. And from that, we try to triangulate the answer to the question, how's it going? And I tell you that when we began the writing process this year, I thought we might be writing the first part of an obituary. Because if you believe the headlines, then it's a pretty grim story. We started this paper in 2018, and it was a lonely club at that time. And the former Swedish Foreign Minister, Margot Wallström, who launched the first one, characterized the global response as very dismissive, even giggles. It didn't really feel like something that would take off. And then over time, we saw a rapid and global expansion and diversification of the field. And in our last report in 2023, we wrote that it was ascendant, that it was a trend. So fast forward to 2024, the year of the elections, and we, in this report, are starting to document our first reversals. And on top of just what's happening electorally and concerns there, there's the just general depressing global context of conflict, the resurgence of imperialism, expanding conflict and recognition that an unfolding humanitarian catastrophe is likely the genocide we all pledged never to again allow. And so, as I said, when we sat down to do our work this time, it was quite a sober tone and moment. And then the process unfolded. And in the course of the intervening months, we heard from so many of you about really incredible progress, launching new policies, parliamentary and constitutional efforts to consolidate and protect them, organizing by activists to use the feminist foreign policy as a frame to demand action on everything from climate change to relief in Palestine. Welcome, come on in. Don't be shy. Come on in and please have a seat. And so that, I think, was a deeply needed, a deeply appreciated, and a deeply reassuring process for us. And we'll hear in the course of today's program, mostly from the folks who are doing that work. We will tell you a few things about what we found with our colleagues, but we'll spend most of the time having intimate conversations and dyads between government officials who are at the helm of this work, activists who are shaping it, and hopefully map for you some of those trend lines over the course of the conversation. And that's why we are calling today's event Beyond the Headlines, because we feel like there's a whole great lot of progress that isn't being documented on a daily basis, and it's our hope that our role in this space is to tell a more complete history of this evolving field. It's our privilege and our duty to do that, and I'm so delighted today to share that story with you through mostly a presentation by our senior policy advisor and co-author of the report, Spagme Ahmed, who will kick us off with an overview of trends and highlights. And then we will move into the dyads and have an inspiring closing speaker who will launch a new resource for us today. Before I hand the floor to Spagme, I want to just send my deepest congratulations and thank yous to Katie Whipke, who is here with us and who agreed to come on board as a consultant for us this year as the lead author of our report, and also for the contributions from my colleagues Jill Montilla, who is here in the front and has done an enormous amount of work for this program, in addition to her contributions to the report, Lorena Torres Pena, who is in New York today, and also for our contributions from Beth Woroniuk, our senior fellow, and Mabel Bianco. So just thank you to you. And now, it's my deep pleasure to turn it over to Spagme to take us through the actual findings. Over to you, Spagme.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces and to have the opportunity to share this research with you all. I want to start on a bit of a somber note and recognize the weight that we are bringing into this room. Like so many of you, I spent much of the past 2 years dispirited at the state of our world. From Europe to Latin America, some of our most reliable champions of gender equality and human rights were transforming into our biggest obstacles to progress. Our rules-based international order failed to stop suffering across Palestine, Sudan, the DRC, Afghanistan, and so many parts of our humanity, while military expenditures reached unprecedented levels. Climate change was raging, from wildfires impacting friends and colleagues on the west coast of the United States to floods affecting family members' homes in northern Pakistan. As Lyric reflected, there were many moments in which I too asked myself, is a feminist foreign policy really truly possible? Are these efforts worth it? Maybe this was just a short-term project, one that fell short of its ambitions. But remembering that change is not linear, something inside of me never quite wanted to let go, and I'm glad I never did. Our Defining Feminist Foreign Policy 2025 report was an unexpected source of light in a troubling context. When we started this analysis, we thought it was the beginning of the end. Instead, we found that the journey of feminist foreign policy continues in all its glory, tragedy, and stubborn persistence. Our report, spearheaded by Katie Whipke and co-authored by myself and Lyric Thompson, covers the period 2023 to 2025. It is, like all of our work, a collaborative effort, reviewed by over 40 global partners across civil society, government, and academia. It includes a detailed summary of global developments from the past 2 years, as well as 14 in-depth country profiles, assessing FFP government's progress against our 5R framework, otherwise known as rights, resources, representation, research and reporting, and reach, or the comprehensiveness of this approach. The paper also features 7 mini profiles on countries to watch, or those that may not have formally declared feminist foreign policies, but are currently exploring this approach, which we think hold promise for the future of this discourse. To start, we found that feminist foreign policies have actually survived more elections than they have lost, including in France, Mexico, Canada, Slovenia, Spain, and Liberia. Several governments developed or expanded their feminist foreign policies during this period, including by publishing new frameworks, action plans, and commitments. These include France's new international strategy for feminist foreign policy, Chile's plan of action, Colombia's FFP document, among others, and with more frameworks on the way, including from Slovenia and Liberia. Throughout this period, we also observed an increase in multilateral, regional, and bilateral activity around this agenda. We're now attending the Fourth Ministerial Conference on Feminist Foreign Policy, have 3 international declarations on the topic, 2 regional ones, and multiple South-South and circular cooperation efforts. For example, in 2024, Chile and Mexico signed a Memorandum of Understanding on Feminist Foreign Policy, Diplomatic Training, and Indigenous Cooperation. Colombia, Germany, Chile, and Mexico agreed to develop a regional community of practice on feminist foreign policy. And while questions around multilateralism rise, FFP has somehow persisted at the United Nations, Human Rights Council, and multiple UN regional commissions. In this analysis, we documented a number of firsts, or key achievements that were particularly promising under difficult circumstances. For example, in recognition of the global rollback on reproductive rights, France passed a constitutional amendment on the right to an abortion, setting a model for other countries to follow suit. In a parallel paper by our senior fellow Beth Woroniuk being released tomorrow, we found that the announcement of a feminist foreign and/or development policy is associated with increased investments in gender equality official development assistance broadly, as well as support for women's rights organizations specifically. In 2024, women held 31% of ambassadorial roles among countries that have adopted a feminist foreign policy, substantially higher than the global average of 21%. As we heard earlier, the government of Chile, by supreme decree, established the first gender unit at its Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which will be tasked with the implementation of its FFP, and Spain codified its feminist approach into law with its landmark cooperation law on sustainable development and global solidarity. These are just a few examples of the progress documented in this extensive report. And while I hope not to paint an overly rosy picture of the state of global affairs, as this report delves deep into the challenges, setbacks, and contradictions, I think our community deserves to recognize where we have advanced, to learn from it, and to acknowledge progress by making more. No doubt, civil society and academic discourse on this topic has also expanded and diversified. Our own Global Partner Network for Feminist Foreign Policy, launched in 2021 by just 14 civil society partners, now welcomes over 100 civil society organizations, governments, academics, philanthropies, and individuals. Regional and country-level networks on feminist foreign policy, spanning from Latin America to Sub-Saharan Africa to Southwest Asia and North Africa to the Pacific, have deepened and expanded their efforts, playing key roles in policy development, implementation, and accountability, and consistently pushing state actors to understand feminist foreign policy as not just a women's issue, but a systemic one, aiming to shift power, privilege, and access. Across our communities, in our personal and professional lives, so many of us have grown disillusioned by the systems we were taught to believe in. And when headlines read of genocide, catastrophe, fear, and loss, how can we not be? But as a mentor once told me, we cannot abandon people in the imperfect systems in which they exist. Feminist foreign policy both reimagines a different world and works with the tools we have to find near-term solutions. So I hope you'll take the time to read through this 250-page paper, or at least a part of it. And thank you to all who contributed. It really does take a village, and luckily ours is a big one. Thank you.
So, as I mentioned, we're intentionally light on reading you findings today and heavy, we hope, on what will be stimulating and intimate conversations. The flow of our program follows loosely the core ingredients of feminist foreign policy as it was initially decreed: rights, resources, and representation. We've added another R on regression. And then, as I mentioned, I promised you we'll have some forward-looking and collaborative resources launched at the very end. So let's start with rights. This has been an area that has been well documented as a priority for feminist foreign policies to advance women's human rights and gender equality. When we began writing this paper series in 2018 to 2019, we identified through the course of hundreds of consultations with activists all over the world that one issue that rose to the top in terms of prioritization was sexual and reproductive health and rights. And the sense here was that if you're going to announce a feminist foreign policy, you have to tackle the brave, scary issues. It can't all just be, cute. And the sense was that this is a prime area of attack and of rollback and of opposition, and that we really wanted to see the feminist foreign policy countries coming forward and embracing this agenda full-throatedly as champions. And we're happy to say in the paper and in the conversation that follows that really has happened. It is my real pleasure to welcome to the stage Ambassador Delphine O, who is the Ambassador and Secretary General of the Fourth Ministerial Conference on Feminist Foreign Policies for the Government of France. She's a key architect of France's feminist foreign policy, which you've also just quietly launched this week, no biggie, on top of this major conference that you're hosting with so many world leaders. Please come to the floor. Welcome, Ambassador. And Ambassador O is going to be in conversation today with Ambassador Arlene Tichner, the Ambassador at Large for Gender Issues and Feminist Global Policy from the Government of Colombia. Welcome to the floor. As Ambassador Tichner comes to the floor, I'll just say that it's been a real pleasure to work with both of these amazing leaders, both to observe the development of this agenda that they lead for their own governments, as well as to see how they have been working together multilaterally. So you have 10 minutes to tell us some of the good news beyond the headlines. Over to you. You should have microphones, yes? Good.
I thought you were asking posing questions. Thank you very much, Lyric and Spogmay. And I'm delighted to be here, as you could imagine, as the ministerial conference is starting tomorrow. I have a little bit of work, so we'll have to excuse myself right after this conversation to run to another side event and handle all of the last-minute emergencies. But I'm very happy to be here. I just wanted to congratulate the whole team in FFPC again for this crucial report that we all await every year with a mix of anticipation, exhilaration, a little bit of tension within the ministries to see how our policies are being evaluated. But again, very happy to be here. So the question for this discussion is how come SRHR, sexual and reproductive health and rights, is such a crucial component of feminist foreign policy? Well, I have to say, it was even before France adopted a feminist foreign policy. Actually, Spogmay mentioned the fact that we published this year this international strategy for a feminist foreign policy, which is really the guiding document for our FFP. But before that, we had already published an international strategy for sexual and reproductive health and rights. So for France, I think it has been a core component of our gender equality and then foreign policy, feminist foreign policy for a long time. But obviously, the international context and the huge backlash against women's rights, and especially SRHR, has prompted us to be even more reactive, if not offensive, in promoting SRHR throughout the world. And this is obviously also in conjunction with our national context, which was another question within this discussion is, as you might know, the government of France last year decided to enshrine the right to abortion in the constitution, which makes it the first country in history to not only to defend the right to have children, whether you want it or not, but to actually enshrine the word abortion in our constitution. And this was a long process. Not everyone politically was on board, but eventually it happened. And I think it gave even more momentum to our foreign policy, to our feminist foreign policy, to continue defending these issues. But this obviously does not happen alone. This happens with a coalition of countries, first of all with Colombia, but also with other countries in Latin America, in Europe, and sometimes also in Africa and in Asia, within different coalitions and circles. First of all, within different fora, of course, the CSW, the Commission on the Population and Development, the UN General Assembly. I don't want to cite all the resolution, quote all the resolution, but also within circles such as She Decides or the Nexus, where we have very strong coalitions that are growing. And I want to just tie back to what Lyric was saying, that yes, it may seem very grim because a number of countries have stopped being vocal defenders of gender equality and feminist foreign policy, but actually more countries are coming to the fore, and we'll see how the report looks next year. As you know, we have added 4 new countries to the Feminist Foreign Policy Plus group in New York this year under the co-presidency of Colombia and France, Morocco, Slovenia, Nepal, and, sorry, I'm missing one, the UK. And I'm happy to announce that tomorrow at the conference, another country will announce its intention to apply to join the group as early as this year. So, good news.
Okay. It's a conversation, so I will be conversational. A pleasure to be here. I want to congratulate the collaborative on producing the report. I looked through it quickly, but was unable to finish reading because it's quite extensive and detailed. But I would invite all of you to have a good look at it, because I think it's probably the most comprehensive reporting that there is on the state of feminist foreign policy around the world. I want to just pick up where Delphine left off by talking about Colombia for a minute, and I think then we'll jump to kind of global, local, and whatnot. Contrary to France, Colombia and its foreign policy, feminist foreign policy, does not represent a case of a continuation of, but I would say an abrupt rupture with past positions, political positions on sexual and reproductive rights and health, especially as they relate to abortion. And so the tide shifted in 2022 when our Constitutional Court ruled that abortion was legal up until week 24 and decriminalized abortion. This came after a previous decision to allow abortion in the 3 instances that are normally legalized in other countries. This would not have been possible without the tireless efforts of women's and feminist organizations around the country. And I just want to make clear that this was not a decision of the government at the time, so much so that several months after the Constitutional Court ruled, the conservative government of Ivan Duque joined the Geneva Consensus at the same time that the Constitutional Court was decriminalizing. So the topic in a context such as Colombia that's conservative in many ways, socially speaking, and that has been ruled by conservative governments is a contentious one. But essentially, since the government was elected, the government of Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez was elected in 2022, and we adopted our feminist foreign policy. SRHR, including the right to abortion, safe abortion, timely abortion, has been one of the focal points of our efforts internationally in alliance with women's and feminist organizations in Colombia and abroad. And I just want to mention the role of our women's organizations and our women abroad. Colombia is a country that's been at war for many decades, if not centuries. And those that live in exile, I'm looking at 2 back in the audience that form part of an important network, a feminist peace network of women who live outside of Colombia. They have also played a key role in pushing this agenda both nationally and internationally. I'm a bit less optimistic, and I'll stop with that, than Delphine. It is true that we're gaining more applications to the Feminist Foreign Policy Plus group at the United Nations. More countries have maintained or adopted a feminist foreign policy as compared to those who are abandoning it. But I personally am a bit concerned about the general agenda of SRHR, given all of the pushback, both political and given all of the financial pushback. I think we really do need to take stock of the moment that we're living today. The cuts in funding by the United States that have been followed by other governments taking suit, I won't name them, but there's several that have reduced funding dramatically, will cost the lives of not hundreds or thousands, but potentially millions of women and infants. And so I think this is something that forces us to consider the current moment with a certain degree of pragmatism and to think strategically about how to both preserve those gains that have been made, but also thinking forward how to re-strategize and potentially re-envision ways forward at times when it's quite difficult to do so. And so I take heart that feminist foreign policies in most cases have placed SRHR at the center of their efforts. Not all countries have done so. And just going back to the Feminist Foreign Policy Plus group, it's called Plus for a reason. Not all those countries that are members have a feminist foreign policy, and not all of those countries that are members potentially subscribe to a broad agenda of SRHR, especially on the issue of abortion. And so I think one of the things that needs to be analyzed more systematically, on this I'll end, is to what degree then, how strategic it is, let me reframe, how strategic is it to continue broadening the umbrella with an eye to gaining allies on a certain agenda, but having to forego certain issues such as abortion, that we continue to be at the center of human rights and the right to bodily autonomy. And on the other hand, how strategic it is to go our own way and try to create a coalition of the willing, which I understand is a term laden with other notions, but a coalition of allies firmly committed to the right to abortion.
There's a nice sign that says, please conclude. That's the first time I have seen that, but it's very nice. No, just one sentence to maybe tie back to the conference that is opening tomorrow, because I assume if you're here, it's because you're interested in the conference. So as you may know, as the sort of a deliverable of the conference, we have been working on a political declaration, bearing in mind that in previous conferences in Germany and in Netherlands, there was no final statement. Last year in Mexico, there was a chair statement, which was not exactly a political declaration negotiated. And actually out of this small circle of us two, and the good bilateral relationship and cooperation of Colombia and France on SRHR, we had this idea of bringing to life a document, a text that is ambitious on SRHR, but also at the same time circling the circle and being able to gather new signatories outside of the usual circle, which is really the conundrum, really the difficulty, the challenge that we're facing. We're already doing this at the CSW, at the CPD. The latest CPD statement gathered 78 signatories, if I remember correctly. So the political declaration is still being negotiated right now. I don't know how many signatories we'll have by the end. I don't know that we'll have as many signatories as the Geneva Consensus Declaration, because this has been already negotiated in a couple of weeks. But I do feel confidence that even if we continue this declaration sort of perpetuated after the conference, in the end, we'll be able to gather as many signatories as the JCD, if not more. And it does have language on safe abortion care. It has language on sexual and reproductive health and rights as well. It has language on diverse forms of families. It does not have all the language that Arlene and I would have dreamt of, or you would have dreamt of, but it's. I think it's a good first step. It's a solid first step to be able to also provide a show of strength, which is the goal of this conference, is to send a signal to the rest of the world that we're here, we're not giving up, and we're still the majority.
I think I didn't read the instructions that I have to say were systematically and very explicitly laid out. So please, I apologize to the organizers. I just wanted to add something on this last issue of language. I think one of the main battles today is in the terrain of language. So we're seeing reversals on agreed upon language in multilateral spaces such as the UN. So something that we have been scheming about for some time, both bilaterally and in different spaces that we have convened, I think both of us, on this particular agenda of SRHR has been precisely what to do about language. So the extreme right is much more organized, much more systematic, and has been thinking through how to attack and reappropriate language for some time. We don't see this happening as quickly or as integrally as it probably needs to happen in more progressive sectors. So something that's come up time and time again is the need to analyze language and to think about how to retool certain terms or how to reappropriate those that have been appropriated by the right with an eye to giving them meaning that would potentially then create a broad umbrella. So I'm just acknowledging the importance of weighing the strategic value of this broader umbrella. Terms such as family, fertility, which we haven't even mentioned, which today is I think even more contentious than family, because within the context of dramatically decreased population levels, the right in particular, and I would say even the center, is very concerned about population growth and fertility. But in the hands of the extreme right, fertility then becomes the right of states to determine how a woman's body is to be used for the sake of all humanity, let's just say. This is very tricky. Terms such as abortion even, which are so charged, potentially need to be rethought. Something that and I'll end on this, something that's interesting in the case of Colombia and the strategy to get the Constitutional Court to decriminalize abortion was an effort at the territorial level with different stakeholders trying to show, for instance, that abortion is an ancestral practice. It's been around for thousands, if not millions of years. Women throughout history, have had to make these decisions over their bodies. And potentially, when we talk about an ancestral practice versus abortion, maybe there's a way to give the term a different meaning and associate it with, these long-standing practices, just giving, and this is precisely what happened via one thing that happened in the campaign conducted by women's and feminist organizations. In a country, again, that's deeply religious, both Catholic religious and Christian religious. The evangelical churches have a very strong stronghold in the country. One of the reasons why, and I'll end on this, the vote to approve our peace accord in 2016 failed. The no vote won. Was that the evangelicals in particular started to spread rumors that if we signed the peace accord, abortion would become widespread across the country, and LGBTQI plus persons, would start, being more promiscuous and, seducing sons and daughters across the country, among other things. And this ended up to be a very strong part of the argument that led to the no votes, having nothing to do with the peace accord itself. So I think this is something that we really do need to think through more systematically and strategically and tactically.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ambassadors, for your leadership, for your solidarity, for your community. And, it's, I think, really illustrative cases of what we were finding in the report overall, which is, yes, this agenda has been weaponized by the right. However, this cohort is accepting the challenge of standing up and fighting back and being innovative in that work, being very careful to lead that work truly globally. I think we may not have mentioned earlier that the mechanism of the FFP plus group being one North, one South joined together, the leadership of Colombia and France working together on the SRHR agenda. And we're just really grateful for that work and looking forward to seeing the outcomes over the course of the conference over the next 2 days. Which I should have mentioned, this is an official side event to that, and we're delighted to be bearing witness to this project playing out over time. So, our next R in the framework is resources, and I'm going to move us into that section. And unfortunately, the good news ends here. We found the resourcing part of this agenda to be really in a 5-alarm fire. And the next couple of speakers are going to tell us about that. But I'd like to welcome Beth and Memory to come on down to the stage. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. Very important brief programming pause here.
You start.
Thank you. We designed a dynamic program, but what we didn't think about was the blocking. Okay, so I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage 2 incredible experts on a lot of things, but for the course of the next 10 minutes of their conversation on the question of resourcing. So the brilliant Beth Woroniuk, who many of you probably knew for many years in her work with the Equality Fund, and before that, she's been an internationally renowned expert on feminist financing, both where the money is being spent, and importantly, how to design new ways to spend it to support women's human rights organizations and the feminist movement. She's going to be in conversation today with Memory Kachambwa, who is an internationally known expert and leader of the Pan-African Women's Human Rights Network, FemNet, and has been leading, among a number of amazing efforts, some wonderful work to frame out what a feminist foreign policy approach on debt relief and other macroeconomic issues would look like. So, ladies, you have 10 minutes. What are you finding? Try to give us some hope.
Thank you so much, Lyric. I think in the 120 plus paper, the first chapter I had to read was around the R resources. And I have Berth here who has spent a lot of time last year, this year, doing a lot of research on where's the money and looking at the ODA questions. So, Berth, I always see you with a notebook. I'm so glad that you still write with ink. So I love that. And maybe you can just tell us a little bit, the ODA commitments and feminist foreign policy and what you have found in the paper that you've been doing.
Thanks so much, Memory, and thanks to everyone. Ink and a calculator. So I was really fortunate to be able to spend some time crunching the numbers around official development assistance. And we know you can see the report online and tomorrow. I won't go into a lot of detail, but one of the things we did find when we looked at its bilateral assistance is what's tracked by the OECD DAC. So that's government. It's what the government of Sweden offers to NGOs, governments, not to the multilateral system. It's self-reported. So the coding of what this aid looks like is designated by the country themselves with not an independent check. And the latest data we have is until 2023. So there's a few caveats to that. But when we look at that data up into 2023, what we see is what someone mentioned earlier is that countries with feminist foreign policies outperform the overall Development Assistance Committee average. So they have better gender equality specific, they have higher amounts there, they have more support to feminist and women's rights organizations, and they dedicate more of their international assistance to violence against, programs aimed at violence against women and girls. They do not, however, interesting given the previous conversation, invest more in SRHR. So that's an interesting thing until there. But as Lyric was saying, 2023 is what we have the data, and we have good news until then, but then the roof falls in, because what we've seen in the last few years are huge cuts to official development assistance and to gender equality assistance within that. The OECD estimates that in 2025, we'll see 9 to 17% drops in aid levels, and that is coming on a 9% drop in 2024. So the pot is shrinking. So, but what we also found was that with a feminist foreign policy, we have signature initiatives often adopted by governments. And that relates to the ongoing demand from feminist organizations to improve not just the quantity of assistance, but the quality. Have more going to women's rights organizations. And so we saw in Canada, the Netherlands, here in France, initiatives that did try to respond to that, which is very, very encouraging. And so one of the things going forward is looking at how do we ring fence, how do we protect those funds in the midst of those cuts. So what we're trying to do globally is look at, is there other funding for women's rights organizations? And we can talk a little bit about that later. What role do feminist foreign policy countries play in defending and making the case for funding for women's rights organizations? And that's not just the global north countries who provide assistance, that's also the feminist foreign policy countries in the global south, because we are going to be entering into discussions on what does a post-ODA world look like, and those will be global discussions. And so how do we raise feminist issues, feminist analysis into those conversations? And I think for me, that links to the broader discussions we've had this year on the global financial architecture, the discussions at Financing for Development 4. And I know, Memory, you were really involved in that. You were one of the leaders of the feminist work stream, looking at issues in Financing for Development 4 and the conference in Seville. You've done extensive work on debt. Where are you seeing leadership, and what kinds of issues when we move away just from ODA to the broader global context?
Thanks so much, Berth. And I think just to pick from what you talked about, looking at financing beyond ODA and also looking at Global South and other alternative forms of financing, I think one thing that the feminist movement has been putting forward is what sort of feminist alternatives can we actually, financing that we can look into, but also prioritizing some specific things like the K economy, a redistributive economy, and putting that forward as a priority and as alternatives to what feminist funding could look like and what governments can actually start looking at. So I think those are some of the things that kept coming in and making the intersections. I think picking from the previous conversation on SRHR with climate financing, for example, I think it's very critical, especially as within the climate space, which is very central. There's a lot of mention around a just transition, which is driven by energy, which is driven by resources, and that sort of like extends the extractive agenda. And when you look at feminist foreign policy, how it also sort of like really or feminist development policy also really looks deep into that to say what gender lens can we actually be putting into that, and where do we find ourselves as movements, where do we find ourselves in our organizing of the work. So I think those are some of the basic things that were coming out, and the things that we also have been very central is issues around the financing and militarization. I think it's been very contentious to see that's where the money has actually moved. And I think the AWID report that came out last year was also pointing to where's the money for feminist movements. And I like what you actually bring in terms of looking now at the countries with feminist foreign policy. And yeah, so I think that's where we see most leadership. I think most of it is being driven from the Global South, especially for debt, coming up with a debt framework. I think from the Financing for Development Conference for what really is the text convention, which was really driven by mostly Global South organizations and even governments without a feminist foreign policy. But I think when we start seeing such frameworks, I think they become an alternative to what the globe actually needs in this new financial architecture. Yeah. And I think I'm going to ask you now, maybe just to sort of like, when we look at this global funding crisis, are there any bright spots that you're seeing? Any, what can we build off? We have the data, we have the statistics are showing us a gloomy picture, but are there any bright spots that you can? And we have 1 minute.
I think there are a number of bright spots. One is we may talk about a post-ODA world, but we're not there yet. Development assistance is still there. And one of the things that we're seeing, and I'm drawing on Marita's comments from the previous session, is given that we have intersectional movements, we should be funding feminist movements out of other pots of money, not just out of gender equality. That when we fund feminist organizations, it's good for democracy. When we fund feminist organizations, they are the ones on the front line when crisis hits. So we're starting to see some movement from some funders on this, which I think is really exciting. So we have an initiative called the First Response Fund that is using humanitarian assistance envelopes and the network of women's funds to resource feminist organizations, women-led, women's rights organizations who are actually doing humanitarian work. So that's a bright spot that I think that we're trying to bust out of the silo of what is gender equality funding. I think a second bright spot is that we are seeing an openness to broader tent, more discussions that maybe a few years ago among feminists they were uncomfortable, and we're still uncomfortable with some of them. But where do we find the new money? How can we build new alliances to look for new resourcing? Whether that's increasing discussions with philanthropy, and for some, not for everyone, increasing discussions with the private sector. And how do we take a page out of the playbook of the right, that it's not just, we don't have to agree 100% before we move on, that we can find a basis to move together when we have something in common, but we don't need to have this 5 days spent in a room negotiating over every word before we take a step forward. So I think there's it's the challenge. We heard it in the previous thing. We have to be smart, we have to think outside the box, we have to be innovative, and we have new challenges, so we have to think of new solutions in this moment. So I'm going to just quickly back to you. I know we're out of time, but do you have any advice to governments with feminist foreign policy? I mean, even the ones that aren't providers of development assistance, what kinds of actions can they support on the resource?
1 minute, I think, is to continuously, I think government, one thing I know is feminist movements, feminist organizations, they really move the needle. And, putting money and commitment, we are in a crisis where we need movements which can shift democracy, which can promote rights, and nothing does it better than the feminist movements. They've been consistent, they are accountable, and they are, the 30 years since Beijing can actually be a demonstration for that. So I think for governments is to really consistently fund and use the pathways that governments with feminist foreign policy, like the Netherlands, the French, the Canada, has actually done, where funding really gets to the movements that are organizing. So I think using some of those modes where we have pockets of money, which is flexible, which also allows and actually reaches the movements that are doing the work. I think that is what governments can continuously do and not fall back on. Yeah.
So important. So important.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Back to Lyric.
Thank you so much, Beth and Memory. And I know it's frustrating that we're just giving you little 10-minute tastes, but it's a very large report with a lot of different themes and findings. So please do check it out. And also you can catch the launch of Beth's full paper on this topic tomorrow morning. We're having another side event with the Alliance for Feminist Movements at Sciences Po. So there's a lot more to delve into there as well. Our next R in the agenda is representation, which is often understood as number of women or some other minoritized group in leadership representation, be that ambassadors in the diplomatic corps, be that ministers, parliamentarians, what have you. And there's actually a lot of good news in the report on that front. So I think Canada has achieved parity in its diplomatic corps. Mexico has rolled out a new affirmative action mechanism in their foreign ministry, considering 2-to-1 female candidates for promotions. There is a lot of good news in the representation piece, as it has been traditionally defined. We're going to do something a little cute with our program today, and we're going to redefine representation to be about how is feminist foreign policy, or is it, showing up on the world stage, even among the feminist foreign policy cohort. One thing that we found that was fascinating, and that I hope we'll hear a little bit more about in the next segment, is that even the countries who are doing really well defining ambitious feminist foreign policy approaches, working with activists, promoting people, peace, planet, often do not talk about their efforts as feminist foreign policy in mainstream foreign policy dialogues, be that at the Security Council, at the UN General Assembly, what have you. And so we're still observing a real siloing and isolation of strong commitments and statements during gender-related multilateral forums such as the Commission on the Status of Women, the Commission on Population and Development, etc., but not necessarily seeing that interaction across particularly the hard security forms of foreign policy, defense, and trade. There are some exceptions, and with that, I am going to welcome the talented Ambassador Ana Alonso Gigante to the stage. She is from the government of Spain, which has just been doing so many incredible things in the last couple of years. She'll tell you a little bit about it. She's going to be in conversation with Hibak Osman, who is also a lovely and talented leader of the Karama Women's Human Rights Network in the Middle East and North Africa. So please join me in warmly welcoming these two incredible leaders to tell us a little bit more about representation. The floor is yours. 10 minutes.
The great thing is going to be we're going to turn it around and do what we need to do.
Do whatever you need to. Yes, you have what you need. Yeah.
And it's wonderful to be in conversation with you. And
Likewise.
yes, and I'm a fan. And I'm a fan of Spain.
Thank you.
Actually, I am.
I can see why.
Who would ever forget that if Spain was one of the first that has given recognition to the Palestinians?
Yes.
So I have that warm feeling for Spain. And I don't think it's a new thing that Spain always takes a stand. The fact that Spain now has taken a stand against NATO and Europeans to basically, work against, the global increase in military spending and cuts of ODA. That is, that's really incredible in a time that, thanks to the Orange Man in Washington, that people are really scared, How is that really possible? Is it possible because Spain has a strong leadership, political leaders? Is it possible that Spain has active civil society that basically prioritize peace and development, over militarization? That's my first question.
Wow, I wasn't ready for this question. First of all, I want to say hello to all the friends that I see in the room. Many faces of good friends throughout many years since we first met. Long time, well, not that long time ago. Come on, we are young. But yes, in Pocantico, when I first met you all.
Yeah.
Hibak, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to stop there. No, Spain is not against NATO. Spain is not against other European countries. We just have...
Military.
Not even militarily. Because we understand the challenges of security in our region and beyond our region. We are very well aware of what's going on the East, and we are very well aware of what's going on in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, and in the Middle East. We know that. But we have a strong leadership. Yeah, that is true. Currently, we have a very strong leadership in the country. Government that has committed to not increasing the GDP spending on military resources, on defense. But we are increasing this spending to reach the 2% that was long time ago committed in the alliance, in the Northern Alliance, because we understand that the times are changing and the times are very challenging for us all. However, we also have a commitment. The government of Spain has another very big commitment, and that is to peace, and that is to the society, the Spanish society. Those are two great commitments, and that is why the government of Spain and the president of Spain has explained it very clearly. We're not ready to increase to 5% GDP in military expenditure because we have a welfare system that we have to support. We have challenges within our own country. And by investing in this welfare system, we are investing at the same time in peace, because we are building peace from their foundations, and we know it. We all know it. That's for true. That's for sure. And there are ways to build a strong defense. And we believe that there is an agenda out there that can build upon security, and that is the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And that is something where we can invest money. So it's not only hardcore defense, because there is even a limit to how much this of the GDP, of the percentage of GDP that the economy on defense, the defense economy can really absorb. So there is like this gap between what is expected from us, 5%, it really can work out for us all. So starting with your question, not against, we are very good allies to our European, member states, our associates, our friends in the European Union, in other European countries, and to the countries within the Northern Alliance, NATO. So yes, but no. That's my answer.
It's military for security, but not for war.
No, of course not.
Okay.
Of course not. That's a big difference. We know that there is this challenge. Of course, we know that we have to do something. But at the same time, the reality is that we cannot absorb all that increase in GDP all at once in a few years, in a couple of years, really, to spend all that money in hardcore defense.
Very good. Very good.
So
one of the challenge. Oh, sorry. One of the challenges about I have, of course, I'm a strong believer of feminist foreign policy. However, there are a lot of challenges. One of the challenges for me is feminist foreign policy is about, peace and, and representation and all of that. But for those countries that have, and of course, I come from a region where hardly, I think there is one or maybe possibly two, governments that, Morocco, which, I'm very happy about that, and others who might consider, but definitely it's not an agenda that many people are discussing, certainly the civil societies, but not governments. Mm-hmm. But when you say, for us, it's extremely important to localize. Every time there is, whether it's the feminist foreign policy or women, peace and security, we have to localize. We have to spend time on the language of this, because it cannot be the same discussions that are taking place in Washington, New York, and Geneva. Mm-hmm. It has to be a language that, because we have to create a constituency. Many people don't have governments that absolutely would be, open to it. Civil society in many countries is, is seen as an opposition or as agents for other countries or people who are pushing, another agenda. So you have to be very careful. Therefore, you have to always, work with, communities and, the language is very important. It might not be called exactly what you might call, because it has to be a product of wherever we're living. Mm-hmm. So when we look at this, feminist foreign policy, and then, it's all good and wonderful and it's for peace and all that. But you see countries that actually announced their, and working on feminist foreign policy that really did not stand against war in Palestine, for example, and Gaza. And actually they were supporting, the war. In other words, saying that it's for the defense of this country, of whatever country that was, Israel, I guess. So it's, where do you really draw the line? When is it a feminist foreign policy really? When do you implement it? Or is it, safe, what is the English word? Cherry pick or whatever?
Cherry picking.
Yeah, something like that. So that, to me, that's the challenge, really. I'm excited about feminist foreign policy, and that's great and wonderful. But how accountable are these governments? Can you announce something and just do the opposite?
Well, I'm not going to discuss other countries. I'm here to discuss only Spain.
Please do Spain. And I'm here to
Other
criticize
countries
them.
that have a feminist foreign policy, they also have probably other foreign affairs issues that they have to balance out somehow. So for us, as I said, for Spain, there is a concurrence here of feminism and peace. And on this occasion, yes, it's been very easy for Spain, I guess, to easy or not easy, I don't know how to define it, but the government has had the whole of society behind to recognize the state of Palestine, to give it a recognition, and to back and support the two-state solution. And I think that you have seen it on the streets, and you have seen the protests, manifestations on the streets. So I tell you, there is a coherence between what our society demands and requests from our government, and what our government is ready to commit to. And these two things go together. What you just mentioned about peace and recognition of the state of Palestine, and how to bring a feminist, a transformative approach to peace. I just hope that we don't lose, we don't lose focus. We don't lose focus, and that we bring to all the peace deals that are going to be in the future, going to be brokerage, we bring a feminist perspective, and therefore we bring women to the table.
And that's exactly what, if you look at from Beijing to women, peace and security to feminist foreign policy, as women, I think we have been obsessing, and because it's necessary, that women should be at the table. So today we're talking, feminist foreign policy, but, the end of this week, people will be talking about women, peace and security, and the problem is going to be the same: implementation and accountability.
Indeed. We're still struggling.
Yeah. And I think that this is I think the two, issues that we need to come about. So I think, Anne, do you want to say something?
I think that we need to conclude.
Okay. Yeah, my conclusion is whatever we are doing, please remember it has to be localized. You have to build constituency. It's extremely important. I think interdependency of building alliance and working together also is very important. And I think we are always, thinking to bring women to the table. And inshallah, one of these days we will bring women to the table and they will be the rulers.
Well, hopefully the next Secretary General of the United Nations is a woman. That's my conclusion.
No, not any woman. A woman with a woman's agenda.
Okay. A feminist woman.
Feminist.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you both. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Habak. We are delighted to be a fly on the wall of that conversation, and really commend the leadership of Spain on the world stage in circles feminist foreign policy and beyond. Our final segment of the dyads today is another R, a less fun one, but one we really have to spend some time on: regression. And it's my real privilege to invite to the stage my friend and teacher, the Marita Percival, the former ambassador of Argentina, who was the architect, whatever feels better to you, of Argentina, the architect of their feminist foreign policy, and now for the last year has been spending time as a visiting senior fellow at the Collaborative, leading the enormous amount of work that went into the launch of her book, which we hosted just previously. I am going to have the privilege of joining her on stage and interviewing her, so I will move over.
Thank you.
Okay. Is this my microphone or yours? No, this is yours. Okay. Sorry. Try to steal things from you. Okay. So regression. There's all sorts of really amazing work that you did when you were in government, leading the development of Argentina's feminist foreign policy and really beginning seeding a lot of the regional work that has continued to grow and expand. And we're also going to talk a little bit about what happened after. And so you and I, in the course of your fellowship, have been working together on a playbook of tactics to both be able to understand and map and recognize opposition as it's building, whether that's internal to a ministry, whether that's in the streets or at the polls, and start using every lever available to protect and to enshrine and to sustain. And when that's not possible, to have strong partners to hand off to in civil society or in other governments. And you strike me, in the course of having done a number of interviews globally with folks who found themselves in the same boat as you, as someone who has really just pioneered and used a number of those tactics. And I want to spend a little time hearing from you about some of them in the hopes that others can begin to use some of the efforts that you have, I think, deployed really strategically and brilliantly. So first of all, let's rewind to when you were in government. And you told me you did something that I haven't heard anyone else in any other government say. In addition to talking with civil society globally, you took the feminist foreign policy to each of Argentina's 24 provinces. You went and you did a local engagement and outreach effort. Tell us about what you did, why you did it, and how that has shown up as a sustainability practice after you've left government.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon once and again. Really, beyond the political division of our countries, we are clear, understanding that injustices happen in territories. The bullets of femicides ring out in territories. The girls discover the sky in their territories, and women dream of a life free from fear and humiliation in their territories. So thing happens not in boom, but in realities and in the places where people live. So it is important that understand that, for example, the international law, international human rights law and humanitarian law, if I ask you a question, because I ask myself this question, do you know of any convention on human rights that has arisen from the decision of a king, a president, a prime minister? No. The international law is the voice of victims and survivors. So the Charter of UN, the Convention of the Right of the Child, CEDAW, the patriarchal power is driven by horror, shame, and interests. We are aware that societies, and particularly we feminists and activists of human rights, we are motivated by convictions, principles, and dreams. This is not inefficient. The very inefficient way is to be conduced by the horror and shame. So this is why I travel all around my country, 24 provinces, because we need to be inspired by the real dreams and suffering of the people. And at the same time, who understand better the impact of climate change? That I live in a house in the city of Buenos Aires, or the rural women that had to work hard by the impact of climate change. So to not be abstract nor arrogant, we need to be, and we do that. We need to be with us, the people. And lastly, sorry, but important to understand that now we are speaking a lot in technical papers, diplomatic papers, that polycrisis, no, multidimensional crisis. Yeah, they are interdependent. They are interoperative. The interactivity among crises is clear. If I ask you, what relation does the Ukraine war with health and reproductive rights in Jujuy, a province of a north of my country, or in Cape Town? In principle, they don't have any relation. But at the end of the day, and Beth is my teacher, international cooperation, the option is for armament and not for free, safe abortion. So this is why we need to understand that the very commitment that we have to have is to be in territories with hearing the voices of the people.
And just to close out that vignette, I appreciated that you had a new problem on your hands after you went to the 24 provinces, which is that all the provinces came to you and were ready to go to CSW and be on your delegation. So I think that was a really nice illustration of the work that so often doesn't get done, but is the answer to how do you make foreign policy something that your everyday citizen cares about and values. It's by going to the people, taking the project to the people, hearing their demands, and then making space for them in those processes. So congratulations on that. And then also to close that vignette, one of the provinces also had a declaration on feminist foreign policy after you went. So there's this nice local, federal, international loop there, and the province level government continues. So that's a nice breadcrumb that you've laid there. I also want you to talk a little bit about working with diplomatic associations and the importance of getting your own diplomats on board.
I don't know if in your country you live the same, but when you know that Argentina was a champion in women's rights and human rights, the first country having the gender quotes, and that's it. Equal marriage and so on, gender identity law. But when I came to the ambassadors, saying that the president defined to create a special representation for feminist foreign policy, the first answer I receive is, what? The second is, oh, stupidity at power. The third one is more bureaucracy. So I do believe that we have to understand that at least in developing countries, this sector remain to be a gentleman agreement. Because not only because we are few people, women, in foreign policies, but also because the masculinization of women is the rule of gold to be ambassador. So you have to be calm and speak that a feminist foreign policy is not the invention of 4 or 5 crazy feminists. It is an imperative, ethical, political, and social imperative, because the patriarchal foreign policy really is the worst horizon for the whole humanity and the planet.
I know we're coming short of time. Yes, please. So I'm going to wrap the last two questions in one for you and let you spend your minute where you think it's most useful to our audience. But two other tactics that I observed you being very effective in protecting and sustaining the work you were doing. One, regional outreach. I invited Marita to come to Washington and launch the last version of this report in September of 2023. And I asked if I could support her, if the collaborative could support her travel. And she said, no, we're going to need this in the future. Hold on to that. And I'll call you. Well, you can see you were looking around the corner. And you had a budget and a mandate in September that you did not have in November. And in so doing, you started seeding two paths of work for your feminist foreign policy to continue. One, handing off to regional partners. So you hosted the first Latin America Regional Summit and handed off to Colombia to host after you. And you also have started your own feminist organization and been a visiting fellow at ours and have continued this work in civil society and in the streets and in the press. So just give us a few insights of tactically why you made those choices and what impact they've had.
Yeah, thank you. Very believe Mabel, where are you? Ah, yeah. Conspiracy at Power, the name is this chapter. Because, in titles, firstly, democracy is alternation. Good, great. So you are not in the power for the eternity. So you have to create a common commitment. Secondly, democracy doesn't have borders. So we can and we must speak with other countries to be stronger, to have a common voice, not only regional, it is important regional, but with like-minded countries to have more capacity to influence or capacity to transform the international or multilateral order and also bilateral relations. The government passed, but we feminists, we are every time, anywhere. We are here, there, and everywhere, like Beatles said. And important to accept that societies don't commit suicide. Perhaps they vote a wrong president. But they have the right to do so. They have the right to do so. The problem is that we have to create enough power to win the next elections. Because the cahiers de doléances have never been our notebooks. Our notebooks are aspirational, inspirational, and transformative, and innovative, and, if you accept me this term, revolutionary, democratically revolutionary. So the lesson learned in our region is that, for example, I know that we are going to lose the election. So we work with the ambassador of Chile, Paula Narváez, the representative to UN, and we worked together the resolution that finally has been approved in ECOSOC, presented by Chile, because I was not more in government. So please, feminist is not an individualist movement. We are a collective emancipation.
Thank you. Yes, and just please do sustain that applause for a really incredible activist, official, artist, poet, you name it. I've learned many things from you, so thank you for sharing those insights. I had hoped that also we would be able to hear this afternoon from the former Swedish Foreign and Trade Minister, Ann Linde, who doesn't arrive for the conference until tomorrow, but I wanted to share one vignette from her that I think is giving me a lot of hope, in addition to all of the brilliant efforts that you've just outlined on this question of regression, which is the democratic process you've teed up so nicely. In Sweden, all of the opposition parties have pledged to reinstate the feminist foreign policy of return to power in next year's elections, which they're projected to do. And that happened because in the party caucuses, from mayors to ministers, they came and demanded and said, this is something we gave to the world, and it's our duty to put it back if the voters trust us with that mandate. And that wasn't necessarily assured. The pollsters were really advising that if they want to win next year's elections, to let go of the mantle. But it's feminists across the country who have come forward, and now all of the parties have embraced this. And there's some interesting work by Kavina talking about the importance of that, making sure that this isn't something that is owned by one political party, but that is something that is really socialized more broadly. So watch this space. Thank you, Marita. And ooh, I like that very much. So it's now just such a sincere pleasure to introduce our closing speaker, who is going to share something she's been working on for us for over a year. And I'll say that much like this paper, the genesis of this project was rather grim when we started out. It was sort of looking around the world at projected election outcomes in 2024, and having lived through the 2016 to 2017 transition in the United States of government, all of the policy achievements that we had achieved on gender equality were immediately jettisoned, including the actual policy language was eliminated from a typical archival process that happens when government transitions. And so we began the work of building a repository. This was totally unfunded, and that shows a little bit in the clunkiness of this tool that you're about to hear about. But my impetus in starting the repository was basically to FOIA all of the governments before they left power, get our hands on all of the policy language that we could, and be able to have, as one of the tactics for surviving, a archival narrative and evidence of what we had achieved in the good days, to sort of seed resistance in whatever we would be building when we had the opportunity again. We invited our next speaker, Beatriz Silva, who started out with us as an intern and has, in going on to do her master's program, also joined our team as our language justice and knowledge management consultant. And we took this project to her and said, is this something that you could just build in your spare time when you're working on your thesis? And this is the goal of the project. And she took it, and you will hear from her what she did with it, which is, I think, a very inspirational transformation of the topic at hand. Bia.
That's very nice, thank you. Good afternoon, bonsoir, buenas tardes y boa tarde. I'm Beatriz, like Lyric said, I'm the Collaborative's Knowledge Management and Language Justice Consultant. I'm a Brazilian feminist scholar and practitioner, and it is so meaningful and important to me to be here talking to all of you today and introducing the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative, the repository. So to do that, I want to invite you all for a little thought experiment with me. So the concept of feminist foreign policy this year turned 11 years old. So if feminist foreign policy was a person, she would be a fifth grader. She would be a bright kid with gaps in her teeth. She'd probably be asking her mom if she can have an iPhone for Christmas this year instead of a toy. I think that your presence here means that you would like to see this 11-year-old through her adolescence. You want to find out what she's capable of when she's an adult, what she'll become as she keeps on growing and learning. The thing is, she's having trouble at school. There's people burning down her textbooks, changing her curriculum, even trying to shut down the whole school. And at such a formative age, if she doesn't keep learning consistently, what happens to her future? What happens to her potential? Of course, I'm talking about the attempts to erase and rewrite history that are happening around the world today. These attacks are happening in places like Argentina and the United States, places that had taken strides as gender equality advocates in the past few years, over a decade, and now as gender actors encroach upon foreign policy, so much of that progress seems to have vanished overnight. And that's, like Lyric said, where the repository comes in. One role that this resource serves is that of an archive. Do you need that one document that that one government used to have on their website and then they took it down? We probably have it. Is your organization or somebody else's organization's ability to platform research impacted by politics or money? We can try to help you with that. Do you want your research neatly saved and archived in a very cool feminist resource? We can help you with that also. But that alone is not enough. It matters not only that our girl is learning, but it matters what she is learning and who is teaching her. I think it matters that we're here today launching a paper called Defining Feminist Foreign Policy. I want to talk about that word, defining. Defining something is a very powerful thing to do, don't you think? Maybe it's where knowledge begins. The first thing that you need to do when you talk about something is you need to say what that thing is. So when we created this repository about feminist foreign policy, we had to ask ourselves, what is this feminist foreign policy that we are talking about? There's certainly no one definition that we all agree on. Every one of our government partners that are here today has their own construction of work best for their countries and their women. So instead of finding an answer to that question, we decided to ask a follow-up question. Who does international relations in foreign policy in the first place? A feminist IR scholar like Cynthia Enloe would say that we all do it. We do international relations when we choose to travel to one country over another for vacation, or when a British family hires a domestic worker from the Philippines, or when I bring my Brazilian politics to a conference in France after getting my master's in Ireland. You are all here doing international relations today by being here. So what I'm trying to say is that if our definition of feminist foreign policy is too narrow, we exclude knowledge that informs our field in very important ways. So even though we might not be able to say exactly what feminist foreign policy is, I can tell you what it's not, or at least what it shouldn't be. Feminist foreign policy shouldn't just be white or European. Feminist foreign policy shouldn't be an English language endeavor. Feminist foreign policy shouldn't be something that happens behind the curtains between the marbled walls of government buildings. For our repository, what this means is that some sources that you see might not contain the words feminist or foreign policy. Some of them may not have been published by a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or by an international think tank, or by an expensive university. Some might be in a language that you don't speak, even though we are in a room full of polyglots. We think that a report produced by a grassroots women's organization is valuable knowledge that we're interested in platforming, even if it's not formatted following APA citation guidelines or published in a professionally designed PDF. We want to challenge what traditional standards of what the feminist foreign policy conversation should look like. And this is because if our definition is too narrow, this repository could one day become the post-mortem report of a dead field. A feminist, decolonized, and humanized foreign policy has room to grow and change, to hold hands with the world as it moves forward, and the repository is here to document this growth. We want to encourage it to continue as new knowledge is produced. So wherever in the world that you may be from, wherever in the world that you're watching this on Zoom, we want research from your country, in your language, about what matters to the women in your community. So, to that end, the Feminist Foreign Policy Repository is available in 6 languages. You can access it in this QR code. There's more languages to come. You can view the 600 entries that we already have in 16 languages. You can filter by language, by topic, by more. You can submit new work. You can share the repository with your fellow feminists. I hope that you will do that because it would make me very happy. So I am asking you to emphatically. I'm very excited to keep learning and doing feminist foreign policy with all of you. Our 11-year-old has so much to look forward to, and she needs us to keep fighting for her. Thank you.
Thank you, Bia. Thank you all for your time here today. You can see the QR code for the repository here. Please do participate, upload, share, fund it, and we will continue doing the work. And also for those of you who translated documents or FOIA'd your government or whatever contribution you've made, thank you. This really is a global village effort. Like the paper itself, there are also QR codes running around the room for you to take a look and take a peek. That will, despite the fact that this program has been in English, we have had simultaneous interpretation in Spanish and French, and I'd like to thank our translators and apologize for our fast speakers. And the report itself, also the summary version, will be available in French and Spanish as well as English as well. We're now going to do the best part of this program, which is the reception. So if you're here with us, please do join us for the refreshments and continue the conversation. If you're joining us online, we hope you have a little something cozy to enjoy, or maybe you were in the course of this conversation. And just in closing, I really want to just thank one more time our funders, our co-authors, the incredible Katie Whipke, Spogme, the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative team, particularly all of the hours of work that happened with our only French speaker, Jill Montilla, who's regretting her language choice, but has done an incredible job on this venue. And Lorena Torres-Pena, who has also been instrumental and who we miss very much today. Thank you for being here, and thank you for making foreign policy feminist. Let's go eat.